Is Marxism dead? I mean, for a lot of people, the fall of the Berlin Wall was pretty much the final nail in the coffin. But what if the whole obituary was written for the wrong reason? In this explainer, we're going to ask if a 19th century theory might actually be more relevant than ever by digging into the work of political scientist Michael Parenti.
You know, when the Berlin Wall came down, it felt like everyone in the West just decided at once, well, that's it. Marxism's done. You had commentators declaring the end of history. The story was that capitalism had won, period. And the big ideological battles of the 20th century were finally over.
But was everyone a little too quick to call it? Michael Parenti, for one, argues that this whole line of thinking misses the mark, like completely. He claims the collapse of states that called themselves socialist doesn't actually mean Marxism is invalid. So, how could that possibly be true?
And this right here is Parenti's whole point. He's basically saying, hey, you're all looking in the wrong direction. He suggests that Marxism's relevance isn't really tied to the fate of those political experiments. Its main job, its whole reason for being, was always to analyze a totally different system. You know, the one we're all living in today.
Okay, so this brings us to a really key distinction. Parenti's argument is that we should stop thinking of Marxism as some kind of, failed blueprint for what's to come, and start seeing it as a science for understanding what's happening right now.
I mean, think about it, right? Marx's biggest, most famous work isn't called How to Build a Communist State. It's Capital. It's this huge, incredibly detailed look at how capitalism actually works, its internal logic, its contradictions, the whole shebang. Parenti's point is super straightforward. As long as capitalism is the main game in town, then the main tool designed to pick it apart is still going to be pretty important. So, what this does is it completely reframes the whole conversation. Suddenly, Marxism isn't a failed prophecy anymore. It's a social science, a method. It's basically a toolkit for looking past the noise of daily headlines and all the isolated events to try and understand the deeper forces of class and power that are really shaping our world.
All right, so if we're saying Marxism is a tool for analyzing capitalism, the big question is, well, is it a good tool? How accurate is it really? Parenti argues that a bunch of Marxist predictions from way back in the 1800s have actually become undeniable realities of our modern world.
Let's start with the first one, the concentration of capital. Yeah, Marx basically predicted that the big fish would eat the little fish. He said that big companies would just inevitably swallow up or crush their smaller competitors, creating an economy that's totally dominated by giants.
And if you look back to the mid-1800s, that's just not how things were. The economy was all about small independent farms, little artisan shops. Big companies were a rare sight. Fast forward to today, and we're living in this world of massive multinational corporations with headlines about billion-dollar mergers all the time. Parenti would say, "See, told you so."
Okay, next up, the growth of what Marx called the proletariat. That's basically just a fancy word for the global working class. His prediction was that as capitalism took over the globe, you'd see fewer and fewer people working for themselves as artisans or farmers, and more people having to sell their labor for a wage just to get by. And wow, the numbers really seem to tell that story. Parenti highlights this incredible statistic. In just one decade, from 1970 to 1980, the number of people working for a wage in Asia and Africa jumped by almost 2/3. That's a huge shift from being self-sufficient to working for a paycheck. And it's a core part of capitalism's global spread.
Now for the third prediction, and this one's probably the most controversial one. The idea that more wealth for a few people leads to more poverty for a lot of people. And look, critics will immediately say, well, what about the middle class in the 20th century? That proves Marx was wrong. But Parenti's response is, okay, but let's look at what's been happening more recently.
He talks about this downgrading of the workforce. You know what he means? Those stable, full-time jobs with good benefits? They're getting replaced by temp work, gig work, contract labor. Unions are weaker, government protections get rolled back, and millions of small farmers get pushed off their land. And this isn't just something happening in the West. He points to the massive spike in poverty after so-called free market reforms took hold in former communist countries.
Okay, but this brings us to the elephant in the room, right? The biggest objection of all. If things are getting so tough for so many people, where's the revolution? Why haven't workers in rich capitalist countries risen up like Marx seemed to think they would? This is like the #1 argument people use to just toss Marxism aside.
Parenti's answer to that is pretty blunt. He argues that just as the working class started getting organized, the state, the government, got way better at protecting the interests of the capitalist class. So in his view, the main story of the last century hasn't been revolution. It's been a constant, powerful counter-revolution. And see, This really shifts our focus again. We're moving away from looking at Marxism as just a list of predictions that did or didn't happen, and back to seeing it as a method, a way of learning to ask why.
There's this great quote from Marx that really gets to the core of this idea. He basically said that if everything was exactly what it seemed on the surface, well, we wouldn't need science at all, would we? The whole point of a critical method like this is to dig underneath what we see every day and find the hidden machinery that's making it all run.
And right at the heart of this method is the idea of class. But hold on, in Parenti's view, this isn't just about money. It's not the whole lower class, middle class, upper class thing we usually talk about. It's way more fundamental. It's about your relationship to the stuff that makes stuff, the means of production. Do you own it, or do you have to work for the people who own it? At the end of the day, it's all about power.
So what does this actually look like when you use it? Well, Parenti gives a great example. Imagine you see a news report about child labor somewhere. The easy explanation, the surface level one, is to just blame poverty or local customs. But this method pushes you to ask a deeper question. Okay, but why is there so much poverty there to begin with? And all of a sudden, the story gets way bigger and includes things like foreign policy and corporate interests that actually benefit from a global supply of cheap labor.
So, you see, this method just refuses to look at things in a vacuum. It forces you to connect the dots. It argues that to really understand anything, whether it's tax policy or a military intervention, you have to ask how it plugs into the bigger system and, crucially, who benefits.
So, this all leads up to Parenti's final argument. If we accept that Marxism is a science for understanding capitalism and a method for analyzing the whole system, then whether it's still relevant today really just boils down to one question. Does it actually help us make sense of the world we're living in?
And for Parenti, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. He argues that this way of thinking is absolutely crucial if you want to understand why we have these endless cycles of recession, why so much wealth ends up in the hands of so few, or why we have so much public squalor right alongside incredible private luxury. In his view, these aren't just random accidents. They're the predictable results of the system itself.
So at the end of the day, what you're left with are two very different ways of looking at the world. On one hand, you can see the world as just a series of random events, where bad things happen because of bad individual choices or just plain bad luck. Or you can see major social problems as the predictable, built-in results of a system based on class power. And that's really the core difference.
So the question isn't just, is some 19th century theory out of date? According to Parenti, the real question is the system that theory was built to analyze still running the show? He argues that as long as capitalism is around, we're going to need a tool to help us understand it critically. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it definitely challenges you to look a little deeper. Thanks for checking out our explainer.